Hello, dear ones. I hope you're all well and looking after yourself and loving yourselves unconditionally, as per usual. Today, I'd like to speak to you about judging and judging a book by its cover. So, when we look at the 4 agreements, which we repeat almost every single time that we do these videos, one of them is don't assume. So, I'd like to tell you a story that was told to me long time ago in my youth, and one that I actually have kept all along the way. And I have actually even used this particular story to relate to my hospitality students, an emphasis on service excellence. But in this particular case, I'm still going to talk to you about the story and tell you the story. But in this particular case, I'm going to ask you to look at it not from the perspective of service excellence, but rather from the perspective of judging a book by its cover. So in Germany, I need you to know, it's very, very important to tip your hairdresser. Very important to tip your hairdresser if you want to continue going back to that hairdresser. Because if you don't tip the hairdresser, when you get back there the next time, they will mess up your hair. In any case, so that's just a little bit of background. So one day, this man who was dressed in threadbare clothing, he looked like he'd been living rough. He had a full beard, weather-beaten. He looked really down and out, scraggly, and as I say, his clothes were threadbare and they looked like they'd been worn for months, etc. And he really looked generally beaten down and out. And he walked into the hairdresser, and nobody actually wanted to serve him. They sort of all looked at him with these sideways glances and thought, let's hope that if we don't serve him, maybe he'll go away. But he stayed, and eventually there was nobody else left to serve, so they had to serve this man. So they washed his hair, they gave him a haircut, they trimmed his beard, gave him a shave, and they fully expected him not to be able to pay. But when he was presented with the bill, he pulled out a huge wad of cash and tipped the hairdresser 400% on top of what the cost of the cut was. Every staff member, you can imagine, every staff member was completely blown away and watched open-mouthed as he walked away completely speechless. 4 weeks later, a shiny limo pulled up outside and the same man got out of the car. Every one of the staff fawned over him, brought him glasses of champagne, took him in to get served immediately. They cut him his hair, they gave him the works, all of the things that people would normally not necessarily get unless they paid extra, and they gave him the best service they had ever given anybody in their lives. And when it came to pay the bill, the man gave a 5-cent tip. The staff stopped him and asked him why the tip was so little, to which he replied, "This tip is for last time's service, and last time's tip was for today's service. I'm a billionaire who had been sailing around the world on my yacht, and I'd just come off of the yacht, and yes, I might have looked threadbare and weather-beaten and down and out, but that was because I'd been months at sea." So when we look at this particular story, and then of course you've got the story of how Stanford University was actually created. I read up on it a little bit earlier, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief overview. These two people a couple, mother and father, walked into Harvard University. And they were very also threadbare, gingham dress, not very ostentatious or pretentiously dressed, but very plain, very ordinary, and very sort of, can I say, frugal? And they wanted to see the director, or whatever you call the dean of Harvard University. And of course, his gatekeeper, his secretary, would not allow she made excuses and he's busy, and they said, well, we'll wait. And so they sat in his waiting room and they waited and waited and waited to be seen. And when he eventually, rolling his eyes, went out to go and see them, he said to them, yes, what can I help you with? So they said, well, you see, our son was here. He was enrolled for a year, but unfortunately he passed away due to an accident, and we would like to erect something as a memorial to him. So the dean got very, very upset with them and said to them, oh, for goodness sake, can you imagine if every parent here erected a memorial to their child? This entire place would look like a cemetery. And they said, oh, no, we weren't thinking about just a memorial. He says, do you know how much the buildings cost in here? So they said, well, geez, if that's the cost of a building. And the husband and wife looked at each other and said, well, if that's the cost of the building, then maybe we can actually make our own university, build our own university. And because this dean of Harvard was so dismissive of them, he didn't realize that these people were so loaded that they went off and they created Stanford University. So what is the story? Why am I telling you these stories? Okay, they're just stories and they're entertaining, and yeah, they're cool. You can sit around the pub and have a couple of drinks and tell the stories. I'm telling you this because I'd like you to start thinking about how often you generalize, how often you stereotype, or you assume you know what somebody's about, perhaps based on what they're dressed in, what they drive. So let's look at some of those assumptions, okay? BMW's drivers don't know that their cars come with indicators. And I have to tell you, that is a consensus all over the world that I have experienced so far. Cyclists don't know the rules of the road. Pedestrians clog up the sidewalk. How often do we assume that we know somebody based on their clothing, makeup, hair, or even lack thereof? Do you really know anyone else's reality? That person that cut you off in the traffic this morning, did you curse them? Did you shake your fist at them and tell them that they're an idiot? Did you? Yes, in the traffic we very, very often get upset. But we don't know if that person is having a crisis themselves. We don't know that perhaps there's an emergency, or that they've been told that they've got cancer and they've got a week to live. We don't know if perhaps that person is racing to get to somebody who's had an accident. Yes, of course, that person might just be an a-hole and drive like one too, but we don't know that. And already casting that image onto that person, that is a reflection of them? Absolutely not. It's a reflection of us. And that is the energy. Do you realize that when you are so upset with other people, and when you judge them and you put an image on them, that is a reflection of you and your stuff? When we make assumptions about the reality of somebody else, did it ever occur to you that nobody really knows your reality either? Did it ever occur to you that yes, of course, nobody understands what you're going through either, because you didn't tell them? What other people think of you is really none of your business, because there is absolutely no ways that you can get into somebody else's head or heart and change their mind about you, because they only make assumptions about you based on their own stuff, the point of view that they are seeing the world through, the lenses of the glasses of their past, of the stuff that's sitting in each of their chakra. So when you look at judging a book by its cover, maybe it has worked for you in the past very well, specifically if you like reading certain things that tell you exactly what they are on the cover of them. But the reality is, even if you do judge a book by its cover, you don't actually know what's inside the book until you read it. And it's exactly the same as the old saying, you do not know anybody until you've walked a mile in their shoes. And that's not just only to be taken literally, where you actually imagine yourself in the shoes that they wear which may not necessarily be that comfortable, and walking a mile in them under their own environment and under their circumstances. So, dear ones, do not assume anything and don't take anything personally, because people only react based on the things that they are experiencing, the reality that they have, and how they are coping with their own stuff, the environment, external and internal, that they deal with on a daily basis. So please stop the generalization, stop the stereotyping, stop making assumptions about somebody else based on what you see of them. The only person that you can truly speak from is from oneself. And even then, don't we very often make assumptions about how we understand things? So just for today, be impeccable with your word. Do not take anything personally. Do not make assumptions. Just do your best. Just for today, do not worry. Do not anger. Do your work honestly and work honestly and hard on yourself. Be kind to all living things and be grateful for everything you have. Folks, please, I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe because there's a lot more content coming to you. With so much love.